What would you do if the love of your life vanished on your wedding night? In this gripping tale of secrets and betrayal, Khalid's quest to uncover the truth reveals a web of danger, lies, and a shocking legacy. Who can he trust? And will he find Layla before it's too late? Stay with us to unravel this thrilling story. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, their lights refracting into a sea of opulent gold and cream. The air carried a hum of anticipation, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns filled the space, their eyes fixed on Khalid Al-Fayez, the enigmatic groom standing at the head of the room. His presence commanded attention, a man who had built his empire from nothing, now marrying the woman who had captivated him like no other. Layla Hart stood by his side, the embodiment of grace. Her ivory gown trailed behind her, each step light, as though she were walking on air. Yet those closest to her could see the flicker of unease in her eyes, the subtle tightening of her jaw. Miriam, Khalid's older sister, observed her intently from the corner of the room, her keen instincts picking up on something amiss. The ceremony had been flawless, a spectacle befitting Khalid's status, but the reception carried a weight that seemed to press down on Layla's shoulders. As Khalid leaned closer to whisper, "Are you happy, my love?" she forced a smile, her voice soft. "Of course. I couldn't be happier." A waiter approached with a silver tray, offering champagne. Layla hesitated before taking a glass, her hand trembling ever so slightly. Khalid noticed and touched her wrist gently. "You're trembling," he said, his brow furrowed. She shook her head with a quick laugh. "It's just nerves. This is all so overwhelming." A moment later, her phone buzzed in the pocket of her satin clutch. She glanced at the screen, and her face paled. The text read, "Do you really think this is over?" Her heart raced, the sound of the crowd fading into a dull roar. Quickly, she slipped the phone back into her clutch and scanned the room, her eyes darting between unfamiliar faces. "Layla?" Khalid's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. She turned to him, her smile too tight. "I just need a moment," she murmured, stepping away before he could question further. Miriam's gaze followed her retreat, her expression darkening. Layla slipped into the quiet sanctuary of the bridal suite, the sound of her heels muffled against the plush carpet. She shut the door and leaned against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The text message felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She opened her clutch again, her fingers brushing against a folded envelope. She hadn't meant to open it before, but something compelled her now. The handwriting inside was unmistakable. "If you don't leave tonight, the consequences will be on your hands." Tears welled in her eyes as she sank onto the edge of the chaise lounge. Her hands trembled as she clutched the note to her chest. She thought she could leave this behind, start fresh, and build a new life with Khalid. But the shadows of her past weren't so easily cast aside. Back in the ballroom, Khalid mingled with guests, though his focus remained on the door Layla had disappeared behind. Miriam approached, her voice low and probing. "She's radiant, Khalid, but something about her doesn't sit right with me." Khalid stiffened. "Not tonight, Miriam. Let us have this moment." Miriam's lips pressed into a thin line. "You trust too easily. That could be your undoing." Before Khalid could respond, a commotion erupted near the main entrance. A waiter rushed toward him, breathless. "Sir, I think you should come quickly." The bridal suite door hung ajar when Khalid arrived. Inside, the room was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of the ocean waves crashing beyond the windows. The veil Layla had so carefully pinned to her hair lay crumpled on the chaise lounge, along with her bouquet. On the vanity, a note scrawled hastily read, "I'm sorry, I had no choice. Forgive me." Khalid's world tilted as he read the words. His grip on the paper tightened as his chest heaved, struggling for air. The room seemed to close in around him, the weight of betrayal bearing down with an intensity that threatened to crush him. Outside, the distant hum of the party continued, oblivious to the devastation unraveling within. Miriam appeared at the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I told you," she said quietly. Khalid turned to her, his face a storm of anger and confusion. "She wouldn't just leave," he growled. "Someone made her do this." Miriam crossed her arms. Perhaps. Or maybe she's exactly who I warned you she was. Khalid's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, his hands trembling. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Hesitating only a moment, he answered. A distorted voice on the other end sent chills down his spine. If you want her back, Khalid, you'll have to pay the price. Walk away now, or lose everything. The ballroom glittered like a scene from a dream, the golden chandeliers casting warm light over an array of well-dressed guests. Khalid Al-Fayez stood at the center, his tailored tuxedo fitting him like a second skin, radiating confidence and charm. A man who had conquered empires of wealth, now conquering what he believed to be his most elusive dream, love. He turned his gaze to Layla Hart, his bride, glowing in an ivory gown that seemed to blend into the opulent setting. She smiled at him, the corners of her lips trembling almost imperceptibly. Khalid saw it as the nervousness of a new bride. But beneath her polished exterior, Layla's heart pounded. The weight of her choices pressed on her chest like iron chains. She glanced at the crowd, her hand gripping her bouquet tightly, each face blurred into a mosaic of expectations. Admiration for Khalid, envy of their union, but also a shadow of danger she couldn't shake. The first dance began, and Khalid pulled her close. His touch was firm, reassuring. "You're mine now," he whispered with a chuckle. But his words carried a sincerity that warmed her, even as the icy grip of dread tightened around her throat. "Forever," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart screamed otherwise. Miriam, Khalid's elder sister, observed them from across the room. Her sharp eyes caught the subtle tension in Layla's movements, the fleeting glance over her shoulder. She had always been protective of Khalid, and something about this woman didn't sit right with her. As the music swelled, a waiter approached Layla with a silver tray holding a phone. "Ma'am, a message for you," he murmured, bowing slightly. Khalid raised an eyebrow but said nothing, watching as Layla's expression froze. The screen displayed a single line. "Do you think you can escape what you owe?" Her breath caught, and the color drained from her face. She quickly placed the phone back on the tray, muttering thanks. Khalid leaned in, concerned. "Layla, what is it?" "Nothing," she said quickly, her voice thin. "Just a work thing. Excuse me, I need a moment." She hurried off, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Khalid frowned, watching her retreating form. Miriam approached, a glass of champagne in her hand, her brow arched in suspicion. "Trouble in paradise already?" she said dryly. "Not now, Miriam," Khalid replied, his jaw tightening. "She's adjusting, that's all." Miriam smirked, but her gaze lingered on the direction Layla had gone. Adjusting, she thought to herself, or hiding something. Layla found refuge in the bridal suite, locking the door behind her. She pressed her back against it, her hands trembling as she reached into her clutch. The note she had hidden earlier now seemed to burn against her palm. Unfolding it, her eyes scanned the message. "Tonight is your last chance. Don't make me remind you what's at stake." Her chest heaved as tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She had tried to leave this part of her life behind. She wanted to believe that Khalid's love could erase the shadows of her past. But those shadows had found her even here, on her wedding night. She couldn't involve him. He had no idea what he was stepping into when he married her. Back in the ballroom, Khalid continued mingling with the guests, but his focus remained on the door Layla had disappeared through. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, he excused himself and made his way upstairs, tension coiling in his stomach. Miriam followed at a distance, her curiosity piqued. The bridal suite door was ajar. Khalid pushed it open, his heart pounding. The room was empty, save for a single object on the vanity. Layla's veil, carefully folded, next to a hastily scrawled note. The words made his blood run cold. "I'm sorry. I had no choice. Forgive me." His hand shook as he picked up the note, reading it over and over, trying to make sense of it. His mind raced with questions, but none had answers. The weight of betrayal sank into his chest like a heavy stone. Miriam stepped into the room, her arms crossed. "I told you something was off about her," she said, her voice a blend of concern and vindication. Khalid turned to her, his face a storm of anger and disbelief. This isn't her. Someone forced her to do this. Maybe, Miriam replied, her tone skeptical. Or maybe she's exactly who I warned you she was. Khalid's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, his breath hitching as he read the unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. A distorted voice spoke on the other end. If you want her back, Khalid, you'll have to pay the price. Walk away now or lose everything. Khalid sat in the dim light of his private study, his hands pressed against his temples. The note Layla had left lay on the desk before him, its words carved into his mind. I'm sorry, I had no choice. Forgive me. He had read it so many times the paper's edges had begun to fray, yet it made no more sense than when he first found it. He picked up his phone and dialed. Miriam answered on the first ring, her tone sharp. Any progress? No, Khalid replied, his voice strained. The police say they're investigating, but it feels like they're going in circles. That's why I told you we needed to take matters into our own hands, Miriam said. I've already hired someone, discreet, a private investigator. We'll get answers faster than Nolan's bureaucracy. Khalid's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew Miriam's impatience came from a place of love, though her methods often pushed him to the edge. Just keep me updated, he muttered, ending the call. Moments later, Khalid's assistant, Tariq, entered the room, carrying a small black box. This was found in Mrs. Hart's suite, sir, Tariq said, setting the box on the desk. It was hidden in a drawer beneath her jewelry. Khalid stared at the box, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. He opened it cautiously. Inside was a small flash drive gleaming under the desk lamp. It felt out of place, almost too mundane for the chaos it represented. Without hesitation, Khalid plugged it into his laptop. Files popped up, each labeled with cryptic names. Phoenix, Corvus, WexCorp. A knot tightened in his stomach as he clicked on the first file. The screen filled with spreadsheets, detailed financial transactions, offshore accounts, and a list of names. One name jumped out immediately, Grant Wilder. Khalid leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Wilder was a man he had crossed paths with once, a ruthless businessman with a reputation for destroying anything in his way. But what could he possibly have to do with Layla? Tariq, sensing Khalid's unease, stepped closer. Is something wrong, sir? Khalid exhaled slowly, his voice low. Wilder's involved, somehow, and Layla, she knew. Before he could delve further, his phone buzzed. The private investigator Miriam had hired, a man named Vincent Rayner, spoke with measured calm. I found something you'll want to see. Meet me at the Blue Orchid Cafe in an hour. The cafe was dimly lit, its patrons murmuring quietly over steaming cups of coffee. Khalid spotted Vincent at a corner table, a worn briefcase by his side. The investigator didn't waste time on pleasantries, sliding a folder across the table. Your wife's been busy, Vincent said, his tone neutral. She's been investigating Grant Wilder for over a year. From what I've pieced together, she stumbled onto something big, illegal operations linked to his company, WexCorp. Khalid flipped through the folder, his chest tightening with each revelation. Photos of Layla meeting with shadowy figures in parking lots, copies of emails exchanged between her and whistleblowers, and a note in her handwriting. He'll kill me if I get too close. Why didn't she tell me? Khalid whispered, more to himself than to Vincent. Maybe she didn't trust you, Vincent replied bluntly. Or maybe she was trying to protect you. The words cut deep. Khalid closed the folder, his hands trembling. What's your theory? Why would Wilder care about me? Because of your father, Vincent said, leaning forward. Wilder blames him for the collapse of his first company decades ago, and now you're the closest target. Khalid's mind reeled. His father's legacy, something he had worked tirelessly to distance himself from, had come back to haunt him in the cruelest way. So Layla's caught in the crossfire, he said bitterly. More like she put herself in the middle, Vincent said. But it's clear she cares about you. Otherwise, she wouldn't have tried to shield you from this. Khalid left the cafe with more questions than answers. The streets of Seattle were alive with their usual buzz, but to him, everything felt muted. As he drove back to the mansion, his thoughts churned relentlessly. Layla had secrets, secrets that could destroy them both, And Wilder wasn't the kind of man who let loose ends go untied. Back in his study, Khalid replayed every moment with Layla in his mind. Her hesitations, her glances over her shoulder, the way she had always seemed on edge when his business was mentioned. He couldn't deny it anymore. She had been hiding something from the start. But she was his wife. And no matter how much she had lied, no matter what danger she had brought into their lives, Khalid wasn't about to abandon her. If Wilder thought he could rip her away from him, he was about to learn otherwise. Khalid stared at the flickering screen of his laptop, the files he had uncovered refusing to let his mind rest. Wilder's name loomed in every document, tied to accounts and transactions that painted a picture of corruption and greed. But it was Layla's involvement, her secret meetings, her handwritten warnings, that gnawed at him most. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, the tension in his chest a vice that refused to loosen. A knock on the door broke his thoughts. It was Tariq, his assistant, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Sir, there's something you need to see," Tariq said, his voice unusually cautious. Khalid gestured for him to enter. Tariq stepped forward, holding a slim manila envelope. "This was left in the main hall. It's addressed to you." The envelope felt heavy in Khalid's hands, though its weight was more psychological than physical. He opened it, finding a single photograph inside. It showed Layla sitting across a table from a man in a dark suit. Wilder. Her face was tense, her hands clasped in front of her as though she were pleading. The timestamp in the corner showed the meeting had taken place a month before the wedding. Khalid's throat tightened. "Where did this come from?" "No idea, sir," Tariq said quietly. "It was just there." Khalid dismissed him with a wave, his mind racing. The image burned into his mind, stoking an anger he hadn't realized he was capable of. Layla had met Wilder, and not just once, if the files on the flash drive were any indication. She had lied to him. She had kept him in the dark. But why? The door creaked open again, this time without a knock. Miriam stepped in, her expression unreadable but her posture stiff. "I see Tariq delivered the message," she said, nodding toward the photo in Khalid's hand. "You knew about this?" Khalid asked sharply. "I suspected," Miriam replied, her voice cool. "I've been keeping tabs on Layla ever since she walked into your life. Something about her never sat right with me." "And you didn't think to tell me?" Khalid's voice rose, the photograph crumpling slightly in his grip. Miriam crossed her arms. "I didn't have proof until now. And even if I did, would you have listened? You were blinded by love, Khalid. You still are." Khalid slammed the photo onto his desk, standing abruptly. "Blinded? She's my wife, Miriam. I trusted her. I still do." "Then you're a fool," Miriam said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Look at the evidence in front of you. She met with Wilder. She knew he was dangerous, and she chose to involve herself anyway." "Maybe she had no choice," Khalid shot back. "Maybe she was protecting herself, or me." "Protecting you?" Miriam scoffed. "If she cared about protecting you, she would have told you the truth." The words hit harder than Khalid cared to admit. He turned away from Miriam, staring out the window at the dark expanse of the city. "I don't need your judgments right now, Miriam. I need answers." "Then start by asking the right people," Miriam said, her tone softening slightly. "Ahmed, for example." Khalid turned sharply. "Ahmed? What does he have to do with this?" "I overheard him on a phone call the night of the wedding," Miriam said. "He was agitated, talking about Wilder. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, it's worth investigating." Without another word, Khalid strode out of the room, his steps echoing through the empty halls of the mansion. He found Ahmed in the security wing, reviewing footage on a bank of monitors. The man looked up as Khalid approached, his face immediately guarded. "Sir," Ahmed began, standing from his chair. "Is something wrong?" "You tell me," Khalid said, his voice low and dangerous. He threw the photograph onto the desk in front of Ahmed. "What do you know about this?" Ahmed's eyes flicked to the photo, and for a moment, something unspoken passed across his face. I don't know anything about that," he stammered. "Liar," Khalid snapped, slamming his hands onto the desk. "You were on the phone with someone the night of the wedding, someone connected to Wilder. Don't deny it." Ahmed swallowed hard, his hands clenching at his sides. I was just following orders, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Whose orders? Khalid demanded, his chest tightening with anger. Ahmed hesitated, his eyes darting to the door as though considering an escape. But there was nowhere to run. Wilder's, he admitted. He paid me to keep an eye on Layla. He said she was valuable. Khalid's fists clenched at his sides. And you didn't think to tell me? Ahmed's voice trembled. He threatened my family, sir. I didn't have a choice. Khalid turned away, his mind spinning. Ahmed's betrayal was another knife in his back, but it also confirmed what he had feared most. Layla's connection to Wilder wasn't incidental. She was in far deeper than he could have imagined. The dim light flickered overhead, casting long, ominous shadows on the cold concrete walls. Layla's wrists ached from the restraints biting into her skin. The room was silent except for the faint hum of an air vent above her. She had been here for hours. Or was it days? Time blurred when fear and exhaustion consumed every waking moment. The sound of approaching footsteps jolted her from her daze. Her pulse quickened as the heavy door creaked open, revealing a man in a tailored suit. His face was sharp, his features unforgiving, and his expression one of controlled disdain. Grant Wilder. He stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. Layla, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You've been very busy, haven't you? Digging into things that don't concern you. Layla lifted her chin, summoning a defiance she didn't quite feel. The truth concerns everyone, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Wilder chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. He leaned against the table in the center of the room, his piercing gaze fixed on her. You think exposing me will fix anything? You're a pawn in a game far bigger than you understand. And you think you can silence me? Layla shot back, her voice rising. You think I'm scared of you? Wilder's smirk widened. Oh, I don't need you to be scared, Layla. I just need you to realize how expendable you are. Her chest tightened as he placed a file on the table, sliding it toward her. She hesitated before leaning forward, her heart sinking as she saw photographs of Khalid. He was with his team, exiting his office, completely unaware that his every move was being watched. You brought this on him, Wilder said, his tone mockingly sympathetic. If you'd stayed quiet, Khalid wouldn't be in my crosshairs. But now, leave him out of this, Layla interrupted, her voice breaking. He has nothing to do with this. Doesn't he? Wilder replied, his eyes narrowing. Your little husband is the son of a man who ruined me. His empire is built on the ashes of mine. Do you think I'd let that slide? Layla's breathing quickened. You've already taken everything from me. What more do you want? I want to watch him fall, Wilder said simply. And you, my dear, are the key to making that happen. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I won't help you. Wilder straightened, brushing invisible dust from his lapel. Oh, you won't have to. You've already done enough. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing before exiting. Think about what you want, Layla. His safety or your pride. I'll give you some time to decide. The door slammed shut, leaving Layla alone in the suffocating silence. Her mind raced, her heart aching with the weight of his threat. She knew Wilder wasn't bluffing. Khalid's life was in danger, and it was her fault. As the hours dragged on, Layla's resolve hardened. She couldn't let Wilder win. But how could she warn Khalid without leading Wilder straight to him? She needed a plan, a lifeline. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound from the vent above her. It grew louder, and soon she realized it was a voice, muffled but unmistakably familiar. Layla, the voice whispered. It's me. Her heart skipped. Ellie? She whispered back, her voice barely audible. Yes, Ellie replied. Listen carefully. We don't have much time. Layla felt tears of relief sting her eyes. How did you find me? Your files, Ellie said. Khalid decoded them. He sent me to track you while he dealt with Wilder's men. Layla's throat tightened. Is he safe? For now, Ellie assured her. But we need you to hold on. We're coming for you. Layla nodded, though Ellie couldn't see her. Tell Khalid. I'm sorry. For everything. You can tell him yourself, Ellie said firmly. Stay strong. We'll get you out of this. The voice disappeared, leaving Layla alone once more. But this time, she wasn't consumed by despair. A spark of hope ignited within her, fragile yet determined. She wasn't out of danger, not yet, but knowing Khalid was fighting for her gave her the strength to endure. She would hold on, she had to. Khalid's phone buzzed on his desk, the name Wilder flashing across the screen like a taunt. He stared at it, his jaw tightening as a swirl of anger and apprehension flooded him. The moment stretched long, the incessant vibration filling the silence of his office. Finally, with a sharp inhale, he picked up. "Khalid," Wilder's voice oozed through the line, casual yet menacing. "I'm glad you answered. I was starting to think you didn't care about your lovely wife after all." Khalid's grip on the phone tightened. "If you've hurt her—" "Relax," Wilder interrupted, his tone almost amused. "Layla's fine, for now, but her future, well, that depends on how reasonable you're willing to be." "What do you want?" Khalid snapped, his voice cold. Wilder chuckled. "Straight to the point. I like that. You see, Khalid, I've spent years watching your empire grow, and I think it's time you gave a little back." Khalid's mind raced. "You think I'll just hand over what I've built? You're delusional." "Oh, I don't need all of it," Wilder said lightly. "Just a few key assets. Your offshore accounts, a controlling stake in your logistics subsidiary, small sacrifices for the woman you claim to love." Khalid's heart pounded, the weight of the choice settling over him like a shroud. He glanced at the file still open on his laptop, Layla's hidden investigation staring back at him like ghosts. "You're playing a dangerous game, Wilder." "On the contrary, Khalid, you're the one who brought this game to me, but I'll give you a day to decide." Tick-tock, the line went dead. Khalid slammed the phone onto his desk, the anger boiling over. He stood abruptly, pacing the room as Miriam entered, her sharp eyes immediately locking onto his tension. "Let me guess," she said, crossing her arms. "Wilder, he wants assets," Khalid replied tersely. "He's using Layla as leverage." Miriam frowned, her suspicion evident. "And what's your plan? You can't just give in." "I don't see another option," Khalid shot back. "If I don't, he'll what?" Miriam interrupted. "Kill her? You think he'll let her go even if you hand everything over?" "No, Khalid. This is about control. He's testing you." Khalid glared at her. "And what would you have me do? Sit back and gamble with her life?" Before Miriam could respond, Ellie burst into the room, her expression urgent. "I've cracked part of Layla's files," she said, holding up her laptop. "There's a pattern in Wilder's accounts. He's been siphoning money through shell companies tied to your father's old network." Khalid frowned, leaning over the screen. "How does this help us?" Ellie's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up an encrypted email chain. "This. Layla intercepted it weeks before the wedding. Wilder's been using someone on your payroll to manipulate these accounts. Ahmed." Khalid's breath hitched. Ahmed's betrayal was still raw, but this added layer made it sting even deeper. "And Wilder wants me to hand over control to cover his tracks." "Exactly," Ellie confirmed. "If you give him what he wants, he'll bury this so deep you'll never find it again. But if we use this," she gestured to the screen, "we can hit him where it hurts." Miriam stepped forward, her skepticism giving way to resolve. "But that means stalling him. Are you willing to risk it?" Khalid exhaled sharply, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "What's the alternative? Let him win?" Ellie hesitated. "There's one more thing. Layla left a message embedded in the files. It's fragmented, but it's clear she anticipated this." "What does it say?" Khalid demanded. Ellie hesitated before reading aloud. "If you're reading this, it means Wilder's closing in. Don't give him what he wants. Fight back, and don't trust anyone." The room fell silent, the message hanging heavy in the air. Khalid closed his eyes, the pain of her words cutting deep. She had been fighting alone, preparing for the worst, and now it was up to him to finish what she started. He opened his eyes, his gaze hard. "Set up a meeting with Wilder. I'll stall him long enough for you to finish decoding those files." Miriam raised an eyebrow. "And if he doesn't buy it?" Khalid's voice was steel. "Then we make him." The dark clouds hung low over Seattle's skyline, mirroring the weight pressing down on Khalid's chest. He stared at his reflection in the tinted windows of his office, his thoughts a whirlwind of frustration and desperation. Wilder's threat loomed larger with every passing moment, and the clock seemed to mock him with its relentless ticking. But amidst the chaos, a faint spark of hope had emerged. Layla's files. They were incomplete, fragmented, but they hinted at something. Someone. The sharp buzz of his phone cut through the silence. Khalid answered without looking. His voice clipped. "What is it?" "It's Nolan," the detective said on the other end. His tone was calm, but there was a sense of urgency beneath it. "I've been looking into the connections Layla flagged in her files. There's someone you need to meet." "Who?" Khalid demanded, his patience wearing thin. "She's a former insider at WexCorp," Nolan explained. "She came forward to the authorities years ago, but was silenced. She might have what you need to bring Wilder down." Khalid hesitated, the name of Wilder's company ringing in his ears like a warning. "Why hasn't she come to me directly?" "Because she's terrified," Nolan replied. "Wilder destroyed her life once, but she's willing to help under one condition." "And that is?" "That you protect her." The line went silent for a moment, Khalid's mind racing. Trust was a rare commodity, and he had learned the hard way that even allies could be dangerous. "Where do I find her?" Nolan gave him an address, a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. "Her name is Evelyn Reed. Be careful. If Wilder gets wind of this, it's over for both of you." Khalid hung up and grabbed his coat, determination hardening his resolve. He couldn't afford to waste time. The cafe was modest, a stark contrast to the opulence Khalid was used to. He spotted Evelyn immediately, a woman in her late 40s, her face etched with lines that spoke of both wisdom and weariness. She sat in a corner, nursing a cup of coffee, her eyes darting nervously to the door. Khalid approached her table, his presence commanding yet unassuming. "Evelyn?" he asked, his voice low. She looked up, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured for him to sit. "You're Khalid," she said, more a statement than a question. "You look like him." "Like who?" Khalid frowned, taking a seat. "Your father," Evelyn replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have his intensity, but I hope you don't share his ruthlessness." Khalid leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I'm not here to discuss my father. I need to know what you know about Wilder." Evelyn sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her memories. "I worked for WexCorp for nearly a decade. I saw everything, every bribe, every cover-up. Wilder's network is vast and it's built on fear. But your wife, she found something he couldn't bury." "What did she find?" Khalid pressed, his heart pounding. Evelyn hesitated, glancing around the room as though Wilder himself might emerge from the shadows. "A link between Wilder and your father. Decades ago, Wilder's first company was on the brink of collapse. Your father orchestrated a deal that ruined him, legally but ruthlessly. Wilder never recovered, and now he's using you to exact his revenge." Khalid's stomach churned. He had spent his life trying to rise above his father's legacy, to build something honorable. And now that same legacy threatened to destroy everything he cared about. "There's more," Evelyn continued, her voice trembling. "Layla uncovered proof that Wilder has been funding a shell corporation tied to one of your subsidiaries. He's been framing you, slowly, methodically. By the time the authorities look into it, it'll look like you've been laundering money for years." Khalid's fists clenched beneath the table. "Why would Layla keep this from me?" Evelyn's gaze softened. "Because she was trying to protect you. She thought if she could expose Wilder quietly, you wouldn't have to face the fallout. But Wilder's smarter than she realized." Khalid sat back, his mind spinning. "So what do we do?" Evelyn leaned in, her voice steady despite her fear. "You fight him, but you'll need evidence. Solid, irrefutable evidence. And that's where I come in. I still have access to files that could destroy him. But if I give them to you, you have to promise me one thing." "What's that?" Khalid asked, his voice low. "That you'll finish what your wife started. Don't let her sacrifice be in vain." Khalid nodded, a newfound determination burning in his chest. "I'll do whatever it takes." Evelyn reached into her bag and slid a USB drive across the table. "Then this is where we start." The rain fell in relentless sheets as Khalid parked his car outside a derelict building on the outskirts of Seattle. The address Evelyn had given him led here, a structure that once might have been a family home but now stood weathered and abandoned. The soft glow of a single light flickering from the window was the only indication of life within. Khalid tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his mind racing with possibilities. This could be the breakthrough he needed, or another trap. He stepped out, his coat immediately soaked as the downpour enveloped him. His footsteps echoed against the cracked pavement as he approached the door. Khalid's heart pounded in sync with the rhythm of the rain, each step a calculated risk. He knocked twice, the sound dull against the swollen wood. The door creaked open a fraction, revealing Evelyn's wary eyes. She scanned the street behind him before opening it fully. "You weren't followed?" she asked, her voice low. "No," Khalid replied, stepping inside. The room was sparse, lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. A makeshift desk was set up in the corner, papers and a laptop scattered across its surface. A faded couch sat against the wall, its cushions torn and weathered. Evelyn gestured toward the desk. "The files are here. Everything you need to connect Wilder's operations to his shell companies." Khalid's gaze flicked to the documents, but something gnawed at him. "If you have all this, why haven't you gone to the authorities?" Evelyn shook her head, her expression grim. "I did, years ago. They buried it. Wilder's reach extends farther than you realize, Khalid. The only way to bring him down is to expose him publicly, where he can't silence the truth." Before Khalid could respond, a faint noise from outside caught his attention. He froze, his body tensing as he turned toward the window. The rain made it difficult to see, but movement in the shadows set his nerves on edge. "We need to leave," Khalid said, his voice firm. "Now." Evelyn hesitated, her fear evident. "What did you see?" "Wilder's men," Khalid muttered. "I don't know how, but they found us." A loud crash from the back of the house confirmed his suspicion. Evelyn gasped, clutching the edge of the desk for support. Khalid acted quickly, grabbing the laptop and shoving it into a bag. "Is there another way out?" Evelyn nodded, her voice trembling. "The basement leads to an old storm drain. It's the only way." They moved quickly, the sounds of footsteps and low voices growing closer. Khalid pulled Evelyn toward the basement door, his grip firm but steady. As they descended the narrow staircase, the air grew colder, the dampness clinging to their skin. The storm drain was a narrow tunnel, its entrance covered by a rusted grate. Khalid pried it open, the metal groaning in protest. "Go," he urged, his tone leaving no room for argument. Evelyn crawled through, her breathing ragged as she moved deeper into the tunnel. Khalid followed, his larger frame making the space feel suffocating. The sound of boots above them spurred him on, each second feeling like an eternity. When they emerged on the other side, the rain greeted them again, harsher than before. Khalid scanned the area, his instincts on high alert. A small shed sat a few yards away, its roof sagging under the weight of the storm. "In there," he said, motioning for Evelyn to follow. They slipped inside, the darkness enveloping them. Evelyn leaned against the wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Khalid shook his head, his expression grim. "No, but neither are we." The sound of tires crunching on gravel made them both freeze. Khalid peeked through a crack in the wooden door, his heart sinking as he saw two black SUVs pull up. Men in dark clothing stepped out, their faces obscured by the rain. Evelyn's hand trembled as she clutched Khalid's arm. "What do we do?" Khalid's mind raced. He couldn't afford to lose her, or the evidence. "Stay here," he said, his voice steady. "Don't make a sound." "What about you?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "I'll distract them," Khalid replied, his gaze firm. "Trust me." Without waiting for her response, he stepped into the storm, the rain swallowing him whole. The men spotted him instantly, their voices sharp as they barked orders. Khalid raised his hands, his posture calm despite the adrenaline surging through him. "You're looking for me," he called out, his voice carrying over the storm. "Let her go, and we can talk." The leader of the group stepped forward, his gun trained on Khalid. "Where's the evidence?" he demanded. Khalid smirked, his defiance unyielding. "Wouldn't you like to know?" The man's patience snapped, and he signaled to his men. Khalid braced himself, knowing this was only the beginning. He just hoped Evelyn had the courage to make it count. The dim warehouse was silent except for the faint hum of industrial lights. Khalid stood in the center, his silhouette outlined by the dim glow filtering through the dusty windows. His heart pounded in his chest, but his face betrayed no fear. This was the moment he had been preparing for, a confrontation that would either bring Layla back or cost him everything. The heavy clank of boots echoed against the concrete floor, and Wilder emerged from the shadows. He was dressed impeccably, his presence as sharp as his tailored suit, his lips curled into a sly smile. Khalid Al-Fayez, the prodigal son of an empire built on betrayal. Khalid's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "Where's my wife?" Wilder chuckled, a sound that sent chills through the air. "Straight to the point. I admire that. But you and I both know this isn't about your wife. This is about you and the sins of your father." Khalid took a step forward, his fists clenched. "If you have something to say, say it. But leave Layla out of this." "Leave her out?" Wilder's eyes gleamed with malice. "She's the one who started this, digging into things that should have stayed buried. Now she's just collateral damage." Khalid's patience snapped. "Enough. You want revenge? Fine, take it out on me, but if you've hurt her..." Wilder raised a hand, silencing him. "Hurt her? No, Khalid. I've done something much worse. I've made her doubt you. Doubt your love, your trust, and you fell right into my trap." A door creaked open and Khalid turned sharply. His breath caught as Layla was pushed into the room, her wrists bound and her face pale. She stumbled forward, her eyes meeting Khalid's. There was a flicker of relief in her gaze, but it was quickly overshadowed by fear. "Layla," Khalid said softly, his voice cracking. He started toward her, but Wilder's men blocked his path, their guns trained on him. Wilder smirked. "Touching, isn't it? The lengths a man will go for love, but let's see how far you'll go, Khalid. Here's the deal. You sign over your holdings, every last cent, and she walks free. Refuse, and you'll lose more than your fortune." Khalid's eyes darted to Layla, then back to Wilder. His mind raced. He had prepared for this, had planned for contingencies, but seeing Layla in front of him, vulnerable and terrified, threatened to unravel his resolve. "Let her go first," Khalid said, his voice firm. "Then I'll do whatever you want." Wilder laughed, shaking his head. "Oh no, you don't get to make demands here. This is my game, Khalid, and you're playing by my rules." Layla's voice broke through the tension, trembling but defiant. "Don't do it, Khalid. He'll never stop. Even if you give him everything, he'll come after you again." Wilder turned to her, his expression darkening. "Quiet," he hissed, his hand striking her across the face. Layla stumbled but caught herself, her fiery gaze never leaving Wilder. Khalid surged forward, his anger exploding. "Touch her again and I'll kill you!" His voice echoed through the warehouse, raw with fury. The men holding their weapons flinched, but Wilder remained composed, his smirk returning. "Such passion, it's almost a shame to ruin you, Khalid. Almost..." Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated from the upper level of the warehouse. Everyone froze, their attention snapping upward. The sound of hurried footsteps followed, and then a voice rang out. "Seattle PD, drop your weapons!" Chaos erupted. Wilder's men scattered, guns raised as Nolan and his team stormed the building. Shots rang out, and Khalid dove toward Layla, pulling her to the ground and shielding her with his body. "Stay down," Khalid ordered, his voice fierce. He untied her wrists quickly, his hands trembling with urgency. "Are you okay?" Layla nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm fine, but you shouldn't have come." Khalid cupped her face, his expression fierce. "I'd come for you every time, Layla." Wilder's voice cut through the chaos, shouting orders to his men. But as the police closed in, his bravado faltered. He turned to flee, his polished shoes slipping on the concrete. Khalid stood, his gaze locking onto Wilder. "This ends now," he said, his voice cold. He pursued Wilder, his movements swift despite the chaos around him. He caught up just as Wilder reached the exit, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. Wilder struggled, but Khalid's grip was iron. "You ruined my life," Wilder spat, his face twisted with rage. "Just like your father ruined mine." Khalid's jaw clenched. "You did this to yourself, and now it's over." The police swarmed in, pulling Wilder from Khalid's grasp. The man's shouts of protest faded as he was dragged away. Khalid stood there, his chest heaving, the weight of the confrontation finally settling over him. He turned back to Layla, who was being helped to her feet by Nolan. She met his gaze, her expression a mix of relief and sorrow. As he walked toward her, Khalid felt the first sliver of hope break through the darkness. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The dimly lit room hummed with quiet tension. Khalid sat at the edge of the hospital bed, his fingers laced tightly together. Layla lay before him, her face pale but peaceful, her body finally free from the chains of captivity. She stirred slightly, her lashes fluttering open to reveal tired yet resolute eyes. "You're awake," Khalid said softly, his voice a mix of relief and restraint. Layla's lips trembled into a faint smile. "You came for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Always," Khalid replied, the weight of the words pressing on his chest. But his relief was tempered with questions, ones that had festered in the dark corners of his mind. "Layla, I need to know the truth. No more secrets." Layla's smile faded, her gaze drifting away. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of the blanket, the hesitation palpable. "You might hate me when I tell you," she murmured. Khalid reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I could never hate you, but I can't protect you if I don't know everything." Her breath hitched, and tears welled in her eyes. "It started with Wilder, but it's bigger than that. Khalid, your father, he wasn't the man you thought he was." The words landed like a punch, and Khalid stiffened. "What do you mean?" Layla closed her eyes, gathering the strength to continue. "When I started investigating Wexcorp, I thought I was just exposing Wilder's corruption. But then I found the files, contracts, financial records, all leading back to Al-Fayez Industries. Your father orchestrated deals that destroyed Wilder's company, but it wasn't just business. He bribed officials, blackmailed competitors, even had people silenced." Khalid pulled his hand away, his jaw tightening as the reality settled in. His father, the man he had idolized, had cast a shadow far darker than he'd ever imagined. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" he asked, his voice strained. "Because I was scared," Layla cried, her tears spilling over. "I didn't know if I could trust you. I thought if you found out you'd defend him, that you'd hate me for trying to expose the truth." Khalid stood, pacing the room as his emotions churned. "So you lied to me. You married me knowing all of this, knowing the risk." "I didn't marry you for the investigation," Layla said, her voice trembling. "I married you because I love you. But I thought, if I could end this quietly, without dragging you into it." "Without dragging me into it?" Khalid interrupted, his voice rising. "Layla, Wilder used you to get to me. You weren't protecting me. You put us both in danger." Layla sobbed, her hands clutching the blanket tightly. I know I made mistakes, but I didn't know how to stop. Every time I tried to walk away, Wilder reminded me what was at stake. He said if I didn't finish what I started, he'd destroy you. I thought I could outsmart him. I thought I could keep you safe." Khalid stared at her, his anger softening as he saw the depth of her guilt. He sank back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "This is bigger than either of us," he muttered. "Wilder, my father. They've poisoned everything." Layla reached for him, her fingers brushing his arm. "But we can fix it," she said, her voice steadier now. "Evelyn's files, they have everything. Proof of what Wilder's done, of what your father did. If we expose it, we can end this." Khalid looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "Expose it? Do you have any idea what that would mean? The Al-Fayez name, everything I've built, it'll be destroyed." Layla's expression softened, her tears glistening in the dim light. "I know, but what's more important, your legacy or doing what's right?" The question hung in the air, cutting through the fog of doubt in Khalid's mind. He thought of his father's legacy, the empire he had spent his life upholding. But he also thought of Layla, her strength, her determination, her willingness to risk everything for the truth. After a long silence, Khalid nodded, resolve hardening in his eyes. "We'll expose it. All of it." Layla exhaled, relief washing over her. "Then we fight together." Khalid reached for her hand again, gripping it tightly. "No more secrets, Layla. From now on, we face this as one." The door creaked open and Miriam stepped in, her expression unreadable. "You've made your decision, haven't you?" she asked. her tone both resigned and curious. Khalid turned to her, his voice firm. Yes, Wilder's going down, and if my father's sins are part of that, so be it. Miriam nodded slowly. Then you'll need my help. Khalid raised an eyebrow. You're with us? Miriam's lips curved into a faint smile. Always. As the three of them sat together, the weight of the battle ahead settled over them. But for the first time, Khalid felt a sense of clarity. The fight wouldn't be easy, but with Layla and Miriam by his side, he knew they could win. The sound of tires screeching against the asphalt pierced the night air. Khalid tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he maneuvered through the maze of industrial roads leading to Wilder's hideout. Next to him, Miriam checked her weapon, her face a mask of steely determination. In the backseat, Evelyn clutched a laptop, her fingers trembling but poised over the keyboard, ready to act. Are you sure this is the place? Miriam asked, her voice low but firm. Khalid nodded, his gaze fixed ahead. It has to be. Wilder's been backed into a corner. He's desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. The car skidded to a halt outside an abandoned factory, its towering silhouette a stark contrast against the dim glow of the city in the distance. The windows were shattered, and the faint hum of machinery echoed from within. Khalid turned to Evelyn. Stay here. We'll signal when it's clear. Evelyn nodded, her wide eyes betraying her fear. Be careful. Khalid and Miriam stepped out into the cool night, their breaths visible in the chill air. Khalid's heart pounded as they approached the entrance, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his chest. Inside that building was the culmination of everything. Layla, Wilder, and the evidence that could destroy them all. They slipped through the ajar door, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust coating the floor. The interior was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and crumbling walls. The faint glow of fluorescent lights flickered in the distance, guiding their way. A voice broke through the silence, low and mocking. Khalid, I knew you'd come. Wilder stepped into view, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp with malice. Behind him, Layla was bound to a chair, her head slumped forward. Khalid's breath caught at the sight of her, but he forced himself to remain composed. Let her go, Khalid demanded, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. Wilder smirked. And why would I do that? She's been so useful. Besides, you're here, aren't you? That's what I wanted. Miriam moved to Khalid's side, her gun trained on Wilder. This ends tonight, she said coldly. Wilder laughed, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. Do you think you've won? Even if you kill me, you'll never erase the stain of your father's sins. His empire was built on lies and now it's crumbling, just like you. Khalid took a step forward, his fists clenched. You think you know me, Wilder, but you don't. My father's legacy isn't mine and neither is his corruption. I'll destroy everything he built if it means saving her. Wilder's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He turned to his men who shifted nervously, their guns wavering. Kill them, he barked, his voice tinged with desperation. The room erupted into chaos. Shots rang out, ricocheting off the metal walls as Khalid and Miriam ducked for cover. Khalid's heart pounded as he fired back, each shot calculated and precise. He glanced toward Layla, her head jerking up at the commotion. Their eyes met, and a surge of determination flooded through him. I'm getting her, Khalid shouted to Miriam. Go, she yelled back, her focus on pinning down Wilder's men. Khalid darted across the room, dodging bullets and debris. He reached Layla, his hands moving quickly to untie her bindings. Are you okay? He asked, his voice urgent. Layla nodded weakly, her voice hoarse. I'm fine, just go. Khalid helped her to her feet, his arm around her waist as they moved toward the exit. Behind them, Wilder's voice rang out, furious and unhinged. You'll never escape. A deafening explosion rocked the building as Miriam fired at a nearby fuel drum, sending Wilder's men scattering. The smoke filled the room, obscuring their view as Khalid and Layla stumbled toward freedom. Outside, Evelyn was waiting, her face lighting up with relief as she saw them emerge. Over here, she called, waving them toward the car. As they climbed in, Khalid glanced back at the factory. Through the smoke and chaos, he caught a final glimpse of Wilder, his figure silhouetted against the flames. Their eyes met, and for a moment time stood still. Then Miriam fired another shot, forcing Wilder to retreat into the shadows. The car roared to life and they sped away, the factory shrinking in the rearview mirror. Layla leaned against Khalid, her body trembling but alive. Khalid wrapped his arm around her, his heart finally beginning to slow. "It's over," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Khalid shook his head, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Not yet, but it will be." The steady rhythm of the waves against the shoreline filled the quiet space of Khalid's private retreat. The house was far removed from the chaos of the city, tucked away where the sea met the cliffs. It was a place meant for peace, though Khalid's mind remained anything but calm. He stood by the large window, staring out at the horizon as the morning sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold. Behind him, Layla sat curled in an oversized chair, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her body was healing, but the emotional scars lingered in her distant gaze and the way her hands fidgeted with the edge of the blanket. The silence between them felt heavy, filled with the weight of words unsaid. "Why did you bring me here?" Layla asked softly, breaking the stillness. Khalid turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Because I didn't know where else to go. I thought maybe we both needed time to figure this out." "Figure what out?" Her voice cracked and she looked down, avoiding his eyes. "That I lied to you? That I put us both in danger?" He crossed the room slowly, his steps deliberate. Sitting on the edge of the coffee table in front of her, he reached for her hands, stilling their nervous movements. "You made mistakes," he said, his voice low but steady. "But you were trying to protect me. I can't fault you for that." Tears welled in Layla's eyes, spilling over despite her attempts to hold them back. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "I didn't want you to think I was using you." "I don't," Khalid said firmly, his grip on her hands tightening slightly. "But I do need you to trust me. If we're going to move forward, there can't be any more secrets." Layla looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with vulnerability. "I'm scared, Khalid. What if we can't fix this?" "We can," Khalid said, his voice carrying a quiet determination. "We will, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take both of us." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the waves filling the room. Finally, Layla leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I want to believe that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then believe it," Khalid replied. "We've come this far. We're not giving up now." Later that evening, Miriam arrived, her presence bringing a mix of tension and resolve. She carried a small box under her arm, setting it down on the table without preamble. "It's all here," she said. "Everything we need to expose Wilder and your father's legacy." Khalid stared at the box, his jaw tightening. The files within would undoubtedly destroy what remained of the Al-Fayez empire, but they would also be a step toward something better. "Are we ready for this?" he asked, glancing between Miriam and Layla. Miriam's gaze was steady. "We've come too far to turn back now. The world needs to see the truth." Layla nodded, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "It's time, Khalid." He took a deep breath, opening the box and pulling out the documents and drives inside. As they worked together to organize the evidence, a sense of unity began to take shape. The scars they bore, both visible and invisible, were still raw, but the bond between them had grown stronger through the fire. As midnight approached, Khalid stood on the balcony, the cool sea breeze brushing against his face. Layla joined him, her steps tentative but purposeful. She leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of water. "It feels strange," she said softly, "knowing that everything is about to change." Khalid looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Change is what we need, what the world needs, and maybe what we need too." She turned to him, a faint smile touching her lips. "Thank you, Khalid, for not giving up on me, on us." "I couldn't," he said simply. "You're my wife, Layla, and no matter what happens next, we face it together." As the moon rose higher in the sky, they stood side by side, the weight of the past giving way to the hope of a new beginning. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Khalid's office, illuminating the polished wooden desk scattered with papers and USB drives. Layla stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she stared at the television mounted on the wall. A breaking news segment filled the screen, the anchor's voice calm but charged with significance. WEX Corp's connection to a series of fraudulent shell companies and illegal dealings has been exposed, the anchor announced, the words carrying the weight of a long-awaited reckoning. This revelation has already resulted in several arrests, with more expected in the coming days. Khalid leaned against the edge of his desk, his expression unreadable. "It's starting," he said softly, glancing at Layla. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's the beginning of the end for him." Miriam entered the room, a folder tucked under her arm. "The media's eating it up," she said, tossing the folder onto the desk. "This will destroy Wilder's empire, but it's also going to bring a lot of heat your way, Khalid. You're prepared for that?" "I am," Khalid replied, his tone resolute. "If this is the price for doing the right thing, I'll pay it." Layla turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of admiration and worry. "You've already lost so much because of this. Are you sure?" "Layla," Khalid interrupted gently, stepping closer to her. "I lost things that weren't worth keeping. But you're worth everything. This fight was never about saving my legacy. It's about building something honest, something we can both stand behind." She blinked back tears, her voice trembling. "I don't deserve you." He cupped her face, his touch tender. "Yes, you do, and you're stuck with me." Miriam cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Sorry to interrupt, but we still have work to do. Wilder might be down, but he's not out. His people will come after you if they think you're responsible for this." "Let them come," Khalid said, his gaze hardening. "We're not hiding anymore." The next few hours were a whirlwind of phone calls, interviews, and damage control. Evelyn's files had been sent to trusted journalists and legal authorities, ensuring the truth couldn't be buried. But the fallout was immense. Khalid's name was being dragged through the mud, his father's sins tied inexorably to the Al-Fayez legacy. By evening, the weight of the day settled heavily on Khalid and Layla. They sat together on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars. Layla leaned her head on his shoulder, her fingers intertwined with his. "I keep thinking about what's next," she said softly. "How do we move forward from all of this?" Khalid exhaled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "One step at a time, we rebuild, not the empire, but our lives, together." Layla lifted her head to look at him, her eyes searching his. "Do you ever regret meeting me? All of this, it started because of me." "Never," Khalid said firmly, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "You didn't bring this on us, Layla. My father did. Wilder did. You were just brave enough to stand against them." She smiled faintly, her expression softening. "I didn't feel brave. I was terrified." "Bravery isn't about not being afraid," Khalid said. "It's about doing the right thing even when you're scared." Layla kissed his cheek, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not giving up on me." He turned to face her fully, his hand resting over hers. "We didn't give up on each other. That's what matters." The sound of a phone vibrating interrupted them. Khalid glanced at the screen. It was Miriam. "What is it?" he asked, answering quickly. "Wilder's been spotted," Miriam said, her voice tense. "He's making a last-ditch effort to flee the country." Khalid's jaw tightened. "Where?" "An airstrip just outside the city," Miriam replied. "If we move now, we can stop him." Layla looked at Khalid, her expression resolute. "This is it, isn't it? The final move." Khalid nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. "We end this. Tonight." The airstrip was bathed in a harsh white glow, the floodlights casting long shadows across the empty tarmac. The hum of an idling private jet filled the night, a stark reminder that time was slipping away. Khalid parked the car at a safe distance, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. Layla sat beside him, her gaze locked on the plane, her jaw set with determination. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. Khalid turned to her, his expression resolute. "We've come this far. We're not letting him escape." Miriam leaned forward from the back seat, her voice sharp. "We have to move quickly. If he boards that plane, it's over." They exited the car, the cool night air prickling their skin. Moving with calculated precision, they approached the perimeter of the airstrip. Khalid's heart pounded as he scanned the area, his eyes locking onto Wilder's figure near the steps of the jet. He was flanked by two men, their stances tense and alert. "He's cornered," Miriam whispered. "But don't underestimate him." Khalid nodded, his focus unwavering. He motioned for Layla to stay back, his voice firm. "Wait here. If things go south, get to safety." "I'm not leaving you," Layla replied, her tone defiant. Khalid hesitated, his emotions warring within him. Finally, he gave a brief nod. "Stay close then, but be careful." They moved as one, their footsteps silent on the pavement. As they neared, Wilder turned, his eyes narrowing when he spotted Khalid. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "Well, well," Wilder drawled, his voice carrying over the sound of the jet. "The devoted husband and his entourage. I was wondering when you'd show up." Khalid stepped forward, his voice cold. "It's over, Wilder. The evidence is out. You're finished." Wilder laughed, the sound devoid of any humor. "You think you've won? The world doesn't care about evidence, Khalid. Money talks, power talks, and I have both." "Not for long," Miriam said, her gun trained on him. "Walk away now, Wilder. You won't make it out of here." Wilder's expression hardened, his bravado faltering for a moment. "You don't have the guts to pull that trigger." Khalid's gaze darkened. "Try me." The tension was palpable, the air crackling with unspoken threats. One of Wilder's men shifted, reaching for his weapon, but Miriam was faster. A single shot rang out, striking the ground near his feet. He froze, his hands raised in surrender. "Smart choice," Miriam muttered, her eyes never leaving Wilder. Layla stepped forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "You used me. You used my love for Khalid against me, but it ends here." Wilder's smirk returned, though it was weaker now. "You think this changes anything? I'll rebuild. I always do." "No, you won't," Khalid said, his voice steady. "This time there's no coming back." At that moment, the distant sound of sirens filled the air. Wilder's eyes darted toward the perimeter, panic flashing across his face. "You called the cops?" he spat. "You left us no choice," Khalid replied. "Your reign ends tonight." The approaching blue and red lights grew brighter, and Wilder's men exchanged nervous glances before dropping their weapons. Wilder, however, remained defiant, his fist clenched as he glared at Khalid. "This isn't over," Wilder hissed. "You'll regret this." Khalid stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "No, Wilder. The only thing I regret is not stopping you sooner." The police arrived, officers swarming the tarmac as they took Wilder into custody. His shouts of protest faded into the night as he was escorted away, his empire crumbling beneath him. Khalid turned to Layla, his shoulders sagging with relief. She stepped into his arms, holding him tightly as the weight of their journey settled over them. "It's really over," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Almost," Khalid replied, his lips brushing against her hair. "We still have work to do, but this is a start." Miriam approached, her expression softening for the first time. "You two did good," she said quietly. "Better than I expected." "Thank you," Khalid said, his voice filled with sincerity. "For everything." Miriam nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Family sticks together, even when it's messy. As the three of them stood on the tarmac, the night sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with the promise of a brighter future. The soft murmur of waves echoed in the background as Khalid stood on the balcony of his coastal home, the horizon painted in hues of pink and gold. His fingers wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, the steam curling upward in delicate tendrils. For the first time in what felt like years, there was a strange, unfamiliar stillness within him, a quiet peace. Behind him, Layla emerged from the house, her footsteps light as she approached. She leaned on the balcony rail beside him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You've been out here for a while," she said softly. Khalid glanced at her, his own smile mirroring hers. "Just thinking." "About?" she asked, tilting her head. He gestured toward the ocean. "About what's next, what life looks like after everything we've been through." Layla turned her gaze to the horizon, her eyes glistening. "I think it looks like this," she said, her voice steady. "Quiet mornings, honest conversations, rebuilding something we can be proud of." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "It won't be easy," he admitted, "but I think we've proven we're capable of surviving the impossible." A light laugh escaped her. That's one way to put it. Inside the house, Miriam's voice broke through their moment of quiet. You two lovebirds planning to join me, or should I finish this by myself? Khalid chuckled, shaking his head. We should probably check on her before she decides to redecorate the place. They returned to the living room where Miriam sat at the coffee table surrounded by stacks of files and a laptop. She looked up, an amused smirk on her face. Took you long enough. This new life of yours doesn't mean I'm doing all the heavy lifting. Khalid raised an eyebrow. I thought you thrived under pressure. Not when it comes to paperwork, Miriam shot back, though her teasing tone softened the words. Layla sat beside her, picking up a file. What's left to sort through? Mostly legal cleanup, Miriam replied. Evelyn's contacts are helping with the rest, and speaking of her, she sent over some updates. Wilder's network is unraveling faster than expected. The media's relentless. Khalid nodded, his expression thoughtful. Good. People need to know the truth. About Wilder, about my father. All of it. Miriam studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes searching his. And you? Are you ready for what comes next? Khalid met her gaze, his voice steady. I am. We've carried these secrets for too long. It's time to let them go. The room fell into a comfortable silence as they worked together, the weight of their shared journey evident in their quiet focus. Despite the scars they bore, there was a sense of unity that hadn't existed before, a bond forged through fire and loss, now tempered with hope. As the afternoon turned into evening, Khalid stepped outside once more, needing a moment to himself. He walked along the beach, the cool sand shifting beneath his feet. The rhythmic crash of the waves felt like a balm to his restless thoughts. He stopped, looking out at the endless expanse of water. Memories of his father surfaced, memories of lessons learned, of expectations placed on his shoulders, of an empire built on foundations he no longer wanted to uphold. A voice broke through his thoughts. Khalid. He turned to see Layla approaching, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the setting sun. She reached him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. You okay? She asked. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. I think so. Just letting go of the past. Layla's eyes softened as she leaned against him. Then let's look forward to what we can build together. Khalid wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Together, he echoed, his voice filled with quiet conviction. As they stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Khalid felt the weight of the past lift just slightly. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, he was ready to walk it, with Layla by his side and a future built on truth.